Good morning, everyone. This is Archbishop Richard Gagnon here. This is our Friday report. I'm speaking to you from the Catholic Center in downtown Winnipeg. So thank you very much for joining us. As you know, the Friday report is simply a means for your bishop to speak to the diocese as a whole, to receive feedback from the diocese. And we began this exercise a year ago when the pandemic really began to take unfortunate effect in Canada. But thank you for joining us this morning. We continue, of course, with the latest protocols in the province of Manitoba, and that opening up was much appreciated for sure. 25% of our floor space of the churches or 100 people, whatever is less at the present time, but it's managed much more flexibility, particularly in the rural areas where some churches are quite large, and there's smaller congregations, so they can more or less function normally on the weekends. So that's really wonderful. And with the warmer weather too, it provides opportunities perhaps for some activities outdoors. I know that there's one parish, at least in the Archdiocese, that is conducting their Sunday services both inside the church and outside at the same time. People come up in their cars, they tune in to the service, they receive communion in their cars, and that is one thing that seems to work quite well. As a matter of fact, some years ago, I noticed that technique in California, way before the pandemic ever took effect. In Orange County, California, there was a very famous televangelist, Robert Schuller, who had the famous Crystal Cathedral in California. He conducted services precisely that way. Inside the small church, and then the people in the parking lot outside. Of course, communion was not distributed, but still the technique was there. So there's a possibility. I just mentioned that today because the weather is getting warmer, and there are further possibilities to engage our communities if it is possible in our own particular situation. There is another consultation happening. We record the Friday report on Thursday morning, so this evening, Thursday evening, there's a consultation with Dr. Roussin, and I'll report next week on that consultation. Very happy that the province is being proactive in consulting the faith communities. That's always good to hear about. Thank you. Also, I'd like to encourage our parishioners to think about Share Lent this year. Solidarity Sunday is on March 21st. And we'd like to say that, our responsibilities as Catholics, as Christians, for the developing world, for those who are less fortunate than us, continues whether there's a pandemic or not. And the people in the Archdiocese of Winnipeg have always been very proactive in terms of supporting development and peace. The Bishops of Canada and Development and Peace, Caritas Canada, that's the formal name, have been working very hard over the past year together in a close collaboration to renew a lot of things, to renew policies, to renew protocols, and to renew the mission. And a new spirit of collaboration has entered into the good work of development and peace. I just want you to know that the Bishops of Canada fully support development and peace. And I want to encourage your participation in the Share Lent campaign this year. Thank you very much for that. We have 3 questions this week, and I'll address them right now. Thank you very much. The first question says, Your Grace, I read your recent article in On the Way magazine. By the way, the On the Way magazine is a beautiful publication. Congratulations to the Office of Communications for that. The writer says, how can I, as a regular lay parishioner, be part of the opening up of churches? Is there a parish or diocesan ministry that I can volunteer in? What a beautiful question you ask. And I often think about that myself, as a matter of fact, because it's easy for me to say open up your parishes, and what happens on the local level, that's the important thing. Well, first of all, the parish leadership is key in this. The pastor, parish council, the parish plan is something that's always changing. Our synod, in fact, is the parish plan. It is the archdiocesan plan. So there's lots there to think about. So there's leadership there on behalf of the parish leadership, the pastors and the parish councils, of course, and other groups in the parish. Having said that, I think some opportunity could be gained by offering your services, offering your willingness to volunteer in some way, shape, or form within the parish. I'm not aware of the individual activities of each parish, so your parish would have a particular approach to the opening up challenge that we have, and also to make suggestions to the parish leadership. I mean, from the grassroots, like, what do you think needs to be done? What do you think is the possibility within your parish? There should be a sense of dialogue there. That's very important. I think of hospitality, for example, outreach. What needs to be done that's not being done in your parish? How feasible is that? How practical is that? That's something to think about. Telephoning people, outreaching to people is very important at this point to encourage people to come back to church when they are able. But not only that, I just think just a simple outreach to people encourages them. Parishioners really appreciate a phone call. They really appreciate some kind of an outreach in that way. And I would say too, by volunteering in some way, shape, or form within the parish community, by maybe helping out with sanitization, for example, in the hospitality ministry. There's a whole host of things. So I would just encourage you to maybe think about some of these things. Each person can do their own activities. Each person can make their own contribution to reopening up our parishes and rebuilding our communities. So thank you for the question. I think it's a great one. The second one actually is kind of linked to that. I'll tell you why. It goes like this. What are your thoughts on Pope Francis's recent visit to Iraq? I am so inspired by his words and the images I've seen on his trip. Yes, absolutely. Very, very inspiring. Well, a couple of things here, and this is how it's linked to your question. The Pope said Mass at a place called Erbil, which is on the Nineveh Plain, which is a traditionally very Christian area in Iraq, right back to the time of Christ himself. And 10,000 people gathered there for Mass. That's incredible. And the Pope came there to affirm the Christian people in their faith and also to acknowledge those who suffered so much. However, there's another side to this. The Holy Father noted that the Christians in Iraq, greatly decimated by the numbers, suffered so much. He noticed that they are very proactive in works of charity within the whole community, be it Christian, Muslim, or Yazidi. The Christians continue to do their call to outreach to the poor and those most in need and interfaith dialogue and communication. So there you have it. The sense of outreach is there. None of us have suffered the way the people have in Iraq, for their faith. And yet look at that wonderful example, and the Pope acknowledged that. Also, there's a beautiful image of the Pope standing in the ruins of Mosul. That was where the Islamic State was declared. The Pope came there to encourage the people in the rebuilding of their churches, rebuilding of their city, and that the Christians play a part in the rebuilding of Iraq itself. Christians and Muslims together have formed a good friendship, a sense of hospitality in Mosul, which was a very difficult place a few years ago to be in, totally destroyed by the Islamic State. The Pope in Baghdad had these words to say to the people at the cathedral, St. Joseph's Cathedral in Baghdad, where that bomb went off and the people were murdered, 52 people at Mass, including the pastor. He says, we can ask ourselves, how do we react to situations that are not right? In face of adversity, there are always two temptations: flight, run away, or anger. But these two approaches fix nothing, the Pope says, to the people there in Iraq. Jesus, on the other hand, changed history. How? With the humble power of love. With his patient witness, this is what we are called to do, and this is how God fulfills his promises. Good advice for us here in Canada as well. And finally, I just want to say a word about the Pope's meeting with the Ayatollah al-Sistani, who is a leader of the Shia Muslims in Iraq, a world-renowned Muslim leader. He met with this old man, a very unique character actually, and they talked about fraternity and human friendship, interreligious dialogue, and how Christians, Yazidis, other minorities need to have the same rights as the majority in the country of Iraq. And the meeting with Ayatollah El-Sistani is very interesting because a year previous to that, the Pope met with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, and they produced a mutual statement on social friendship and fraternity. And now he is with the Shia. The Holy Father is doing great work in interreligious dialogue and for world peace for sure. Thank you for your question. And the final question has to do with the live streaming, and it says this: will live streaming of Mass be over when we're back to normal? I don't know. We'll have to see about that. I think in some cases live streaming will continue in some communities because of its outreach to the shut-ins, those in nursing homes, etc. We'll have to see about that. But one of the spin-offs of the live streaming project, which continues to be strong in the Archdiocese and will for some time, is that the digital media has greatly been enhanced in the Archdiocese. Our meetings, our retreats, and so on, outreach, that will continue through the digital media and the various forms and platforms that we're using here, our website, Facebook, Instagram, others, our Archdiocesan app, and now we've begun a podcast in the Archdiocese as well. So I don't want to use revolution, but something like that. The effects of the pandemic experience has produced a new horizon of communication possibilities, and that's one of the spin-offs of this. So the live streaming masses have reached many people. I know the cathedral, for example, over 5,000 people view in on that cathedral mass every Sunday. That's very significant these days. And I know many parishes have live streaming, and they have hundreds of people that tune in there as well. So it's been a blessing in that way. Okay, we kind of played a trick on you this morning because we've changed the angle of our camera, and that's because we have a very important guest with us today who is joining us with the Friday Report, and that is Patti Fitzmaurice, who is the coordinator of the Office of Social Justice for the Archdiocese. So welcome, Patti. And we're going to talk this morning with Patti about a very important subject, and that is the question of our seniors, advocacy for seniors, and just looking at that question in the province of Manitoba. I know that, Patti, you've done some fair amount of research on this, and we'll have a little chat this morning about that because I think it's a very important issue. I just want to say that, Pope Francis has spoken actually a lot about seniors. It's important to him. It starts off with his grandmother. He refers to his grandmother a lot, and when I was in Philadelphia for the World Meeting of Families, he spoke very eloquently about the importance of the elders, the importance of grandparents, their role within the family, their role within society, and so he has really emphasized that quite a bit. So it's a bit of a background to this, but so welcome, and maybe you could say a word or two about how you became interested in the subject of our seniors and advocacy for seniors.
Yes, Your Grace. Actually, it's kind of funny the routes that life take you, and it sort of culminates in something like this. About 20 years ago, a friend of my mother's who was in healthcare was on the board of a personal care home, and she asked me to come and consider whether or not I would be on that board as well. And I went, and I decided, even though I had not expressed an interest in it or anything like that, I decided, well, I'll see how this goes. I'll be on the board. I ended up being 8 years on the board of that personal care home and 3 years as the chair of the board. And it gave me such an appreciation of the administration of a personal care home. The finances, the working relationship with the WRHA, and really an appreciation for the staff who work tirelessly and relentlessly to make that place a residence, a home for the people that are there, and really bend over backwards to care for the residents that are there, even so much as maintaining in this case, a couple of goats in the courtyard, so that residents could have that kind of an interaction. So it was really a very good experience. And then a few years later, my parents had health issues, and I became their caregiver. And unfortunately, my mom had a bit of dementia, and care at home was no longer feasible. And she ended up briefly in a personal care home. And she was in the final stages of cancer, actually, terminal cancer. Mm-hmm. And this was a for-profit care home, and they said that they were also a palliative care place. They weren't. I had been to Riverview, I'd been to palliative care, and They didn't have it. And I found that the main thing was that, and for part of the stay that my mother was there was while she was dying, and I was fortunate enough to be able to be with her for 3 weeks straight at this personal care home. So I saw a lot of what went on. And again, you had a very caring staff, but I noticed they didn't have the time to do anything. In the evening, all they could do is hand out medication, and that no time to really interact with the residents. I remember one time this lady in the bed beside my mother, she asked the healthcare aides who were assisting her when Mass was. And it was an evening, so they said, no Mass. And they left. Well, she was still going, when's Mass? And I remember taking that time, and because her questions were just repeating, went and talked to her, and I said, there is Mass. It's just not right now, but there is always Mass. And her little voice went, well, why did they tell me there was no Mass? And it just settled her right down. So, I noticed that there just wasn't the time to take that little extra time with people and the care that's needed there. So that was sort of my background, and I noticed the inadequacies, as I say, of this personal care home that my mom was in. And then things sort of were quiet for a while. And then your Grace referred me to a seminar that was being held in Australia by the bioethics community there about the pandemic and its effect on care for the elderly. Very, very interesting thing. And then so that got me really, really interested in what was going on with respect to that. And I know that you and I have had conversations with respect to the elderly and the care that was giving. So I was sort of curious where your interest in that arose from.
Well, my family background, elders have always played a very important part. Grandparents, one grandfather I never knew, but the other three, very, very important. They were the matriarchs and patriarchs of the family, and the wisdom, they contain the stories, they contain the faith, passing on to the younger generation. And their role, continues even to this day in the great grandchildren. These stories are remembered and kept. So I think for the family itself, the role of the grandparents, the role of parents, grandparents, elders, elder aunts, elder uncles, very important. Sense of family, sense of belonging, sense of spiritual roots. And I think a lot of our elders in nursing homes and facilities, they come from similar backgrounds, even if they're not necessarily Christian. They come from this time in which families were much stronger, and the extended family was more of a reality, and that has a very important message for society. I think as I mentioned, the Holy Father has zeroed in on that as an important reality. I often think of the elders. These folks, they've lived through a very tumultuous time. Many, not only because of the war, but the changes in the church, many people leaving the church, changes in society. And a lot of these folks have remained very faithful. They have a great lesson for the younger generation. So they are a treasure. And that's why I was very interested in your advocacy for them and your looking into that area. So that's kind of how I see it. I think it's very important.
Yes, very much so. And I think the pandemic has highlighted it more. I mean, it's a problem across the world, the way we treat our elderly. And here, I think, especially, the inadequacies in our system have only been exacerbated by the pandemic. And I don't know how much more of a call we need to become advocates for the elderly and people who are affected by this pandemic than what we're getting right now. Mm-hmm. We saw, like in Manitoba, half the deaths due to the pandemic were the elderly, and most of them in the personal care homes. Yeah. And even today on the news, as I was driving in, mention was made that if it weren't for community transmission, we wouldn't have had the number of deaths in the nursing homes. And I found that very disturbing, because it was sort of like a justification for non-action at the beginning of the pandemic. And as it was at the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't have much community transmission, and yet we were having all these deaths in personal care homes. So I don't want us to lose sight of that. I want us to answer this call that's just being pushed into our face to do something. Our personal care homes are antiquated. The infrastructure isn't good. There's a lot of homes that have, for example, the personal care home that my mother was in, it was a for-profit home. A lot of two beds in a room, some 4-bed in a room type place. No plans made for things like pandemics where you can isolate people who have these problems, and so that the transmission is lowered. Staffing is at a bare minimum, and when you have a pandemic, then all of a sudden you've got staff who are unable to come in, and then with even fewer staff, they're expected to cope. And at the beginning of the pandemic, there wasn't really a plan as to how to maximize the staff that could work. Right. So, there's so many different things that could have been done to avoid the catastrophe that we had in our nursing home.
Before we go on to that, I just want to say that what you've outlined is something that is has become present. We are aware of it, not only in Canada, but in North America and also in Europe. The Pope has spoken about this publicly in Italy and in Europe as well. In his encyclical Fratelli Tutti, he mentions how people have been isolated from one another, and the elderly sometimes have been treated in a very sort of hands-off way, sort of thrown aside, too old to receive treatment, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of things that are involved in this whole question. I should also say too, Patti, that the stats are coming in now that the numbers of people asking for MAID, physician-assisted suicide, and euthanasia have been increasing. And yet our authorities in Canada want to push through further expansions at a time in which isolation, a sense of hopelessness, despair is increasing in the country, particularly among the elderly people. It's really food for thought, that I should say. But the question I want to ask you is that, given the situation here, what do you think, in terms of advocacy, what do you think we might do? What things might we think about in terms of advocating in a better way for the elderly, knowing the situation that has evolved over the past year and even before that?
There's so much we can do. One thing, though, that I want people to realize is that advocacy works. Advocacy has values, and Pope Francis, again, is constantly calling us to recognize that advocacy is equivalent to hands-on care and the daily care that we give the elderly. So many people just automatically go to, well, I'll go visit the elderly, or I'll go, do something on a daily basis for the elderly. But the advocacy is important because it helps to change, to move things to a better infrastructure, so that the elderly don't feel lonely. The elderly feel that they have their dignity, that they are still an essential part of our society, of our life, which I don't think they're getting that message right now.
What do you mean by advocacy? Because we don't all use that term, advocacy. What does that mean, and how, like our first question today had to do with a person in a parish wanting to know how they can help rebuild the parish, how they can be active. So what does advocacy mean for us, the average person? What might we do in playing a part in advocacy? I know that leadership is important, but how would you respond to that?
That every one of us can do something, that it takes from a simple letter to your MP. I think you begin with educating yourself on what the issue is, rooting yourself in our Catholic social teachings, and then taking that next step, letters to MPs, phone calls to MPs, visits with MPs. Because if we're not heard, then the MP isn't getting the full picture. We, as an archdiocese under your direction, we were involved in a campaign for advocacy with regards to the conscience rights of physicians and that. And we worked with other religious groups and organizations to put together a petition, a letter writing campaign to our local government to ensure that those conscience rights are protected. Because so often, I think in this society, we don't look at what it really means to follow our conscience, that's the core, the root of us. And as a result of that, I went to a meeting that they have before they pass the bill and spoke at that meeting. And, the government was the one who was proposing the bill, so they were thankful for our support. And in the Archdiocese of Winnipeg alone, we had about 10,000, 12,000 letters written in, which was fantastic. But the opposition also thanked us. Both the Conservative the Conservative was in power, the Liberals and the NDP, because it put them at ease for voting in favor of the bill.
Yes.
And I think too often we dismiss that kind of campaign can really, really make a difference.
Yes.
And like right now with the elder care, there's so much to be done. We need more staffing. We need a better infrastructure. We need looking after the caregivers. It's a shame that the people in nursing homes have been parted or separated from their caregivers, at least one caregiver, someone who can come in and give them that familial relationship that they need. We all need so badly. And even to this date, they're doing the vaccinations and they're vaccinating the residents of the personal care homes, which is great. But what about the caregiver? Why isn't one essential caregiver to this elder person being vaccinated? We're still isolating them, and I can't see the value in that. And caregivers need that type of support in advocacy as well.
I would also include the church ministers who go into the homes, go into the hospitals. They are caregivers in a spiritual sense. The vaccination program doesn't rank them higher than the age group in general society. That's something also to think about as well.
Yeah. And I thought, for a couple of resources, there's a new book out right now, which I must admit, only skimmed through just yet, but I'm getting into it. And it's called Neglected No More by Andre Picard. He was a health reporter for the Globe and Mail. And he's done the whole history of how we finance healthcare, and especially healthcare to the elders, and how we sort of push them aside and we're not financing them. So the subtitle is The Urgent Need to Improve the Lives of Canada's Elders in the Wake of the Pandemic. And he's looking at, nursing homes and that, and again, trying to impress upon us the value of things.
So could you read the title and author again for that book?
Sure. Neglected No More, Andre Picard.
Thank you. I think, too, in advocacy, the political aspect's important because these homes are governed by the political structure and the Ministry of Health. That's very important. But we also have our own local grassroots possibilities for advocacy, too. The nursing homes within our parish community in terms of the spiritual connection, talking to directors, trying to deal more with that issue of making spiritual services available for people. And it's very, very important that there's a possibility there to expand that and to improve that from where it is right now. The pandemic has brought all that very much to the fore. So.
True. And then that brings me to my mind again, my mother's case. My mother was in the choir at church, and their choir, church ladies, I call them. Yeah. They know who they are. They came and visited, and it was such a meaningful thing for her. And I know that a couple of the women that were involved go on a regular basis to this nursing care home. So, I can foresee, for some people, I know one lady in particular of that group who regularly goes to the nursing home, She was like, no, I don't want to be involved in the rest. Just let me do something hands-on. But to take her experience in her care of people in the personal care home and combine that with a person who's interested in advocacy too, and you get a much more rounded picture in the parish, in the deanery, whatever it happens to be, that service those personal care homes, and then can do that local advocacy that you, Your Grace, have suggested. I just finished a 8-week course that was put on by CHAM, facilitated by Julie Tureen Maynard, and it was such an excellent course. And I know this would apply for people both doing the advocacy and for doing visits to personal care homes. And it was called Join the Journey, Body, Mind, Spirit, Spiritual Care Series. And it went through what it means to age, how dignity, relationship, dialogue, conversation, respect of boundaries, how caregivers need help, assistance, support as well. And it was just an excellent, excellent course. And I wish I had had it under my belt, basically, when I was dealing with my mother and my father. I had to learn some things the hard way. So, to build on a course like that even would be fantastic. And to take that course, I would recommend it for everyone, whatever age. I think the young should take the course because, let's face it, society is getting older and, it's a good way to introduce how to interact. And Julie has said that she's going to be starting the course up again in April, and she'll be doing posters and times and all the rest of that, so that when it's done, I'll get a copy of that, and I hope to post it on our website as notice for everyone else, and I can't recommend it enough.
That's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. CHAMS, Catholic Health Association of Manitoba. This is an organization that works closely with Catholic healthcare in Manitoba. They advocate for the principles of good Catholic healthcare. So when that next series of courses comes up on the website, you'll put the coordinates up there so people to see. And you've taken that course. It really impressed you. You found it helpful. And I'm sure that the others also found the same doing that. Well, Patti, I really want to thank you for joining us this morning and raising the issue of advocacy for seniors. Very important. So thank you, and God bless you on your work, and keep moving in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Grace.
Well, thank you very much for watching today on this live stream broadcast of our Friday morning report. I pray that you all will keep safe and working hard to build up our communities of faith at this time. Things are looking more and more positive with the vaccinations that are rolling out in Manitoba. I encourage all of us to have a vaccination that will be good for us and our families and for our communities. The Lord be with you. May He keep you well and safe. May God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.